Welcome to Using Your Power. I'm David Andrew Wiebe, and joining me as always,
I'm Maveen, Kaura.
good to see you again, Maveen. We're recording this episode in the same room as we always do.
Yeah, for sure. Episode 4. So, in your business room or the dungeon or whatever
Yep.
you want to call it,
The lab.
the lab. Yeah, I like that.
I think that's a good one. How are you doing, Maveen?
I'm doing very well. I got my tea with me, David, and I'm ready to record another episode with you and just really delve into our topic whenever we're ready.
Good to hear. Well, it's a beautiful rainy fall day in Calgary. Those words often don't go together. So I just thought I would acknowledge that. So as we record this, it's kind of a nice day outside. Today we're talking about pharmaceuticals. Pretty deep, pretty charged topic, I would think.
Yeah, it is something that's more and more in the news. More and more, it comes up as kids are going to school. They're able to get their hands on pharmaceuticals more and more, and the industry itself is making billions of dollars. So definitely, when I brought this to you, I thought it'd be something that both of us could talk about and we'd both enjoy.
Yeah, I think so too. There's so much to talk about, so it's hard to know exactly where to start when it comes to pharmaceuticals. Obviously, we want to talk about prescription drugs. That's probably one of the main subjects, but we might also get into things like vitamins or other things that may not be considered necessarily pharmaceuticals in the traditional sense, like over-the-counter drugs and things like that too. I mean, pretty much anything that you can buy in the store could be considered a prescription drug on some level, I think. Whether it's like Tylenol or ibuprofen or whatever, anything that is a drug often contains some kind of chemical that may not be great for your body. And I think so many people now are prescribed medications because maybe they have a perceived issue with anxiety, depression, or some other clinical condition, or they've just self-diagnosed themselves and they believe that they deserve to have those drugs. And if you watch the commercials, especially in the States, it seems like at every turn they're trying to sell you some kind of drug.
Absolutely. If you've stayed up any late night TV, you'll have the ability to watch these infomercials / commercials where they try to sell you, any sort of drug that will help the solution that you're looking for, right? So you're looking for some sort of pain solution, they got it. You're looking for some sort of happiness solution, they have it.
Right.
Any sort of uppers and downers and whatnot. The pharmaceutical companies have found a way to, make it and then sell it to you.
So what do you think that is? I mean, if somebody's selling something through commercial, it would suggest that they're probably making money on it, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, David. I think one of the biggest things is I think we as a people, I think we do have addictive personalities, and drugs like sugar, for example, can be addictive. Heroin at one point was addictive, and now I've read studies where they say sugar is potentially more addictive than heroin, right? So when you look into pharmaceuticals, they probably have a very similar feel for when you're taking them on a daily basis, just like those hard drugs that our commercials told us to stay away from in the 80s.
Right. Now, the thing you said about sugar is pretty interesting because we wouldn't often think of sugar as being some kind of drug or let alone like a pharmaceutical, right? But I think everybody knows or everybody's heard of the term sugar high. So we do kind of get high off of sugar. It gives you that temporary boost of energy, but then that really hard crash as well.
Well, it's true, David. And also, when they do double-blind tests or blind tests or whatnot, they always have a placebo. And what is that placebo?
Sugar pill.
It's a sugar pill. You got it. So they're always even using that sugar as a part of their test.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. So sugar pills are some things that sometimes prescribed, usually unknowingly to the patient, maybe because they think their sickness is more severe than it actually is. And the doctor prescribes a placebo and says, hey, this will help you out. And then the mind accepts that the drug will help out, and it ends up helping. So I think there are some studies out there backing that up, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, for sure. I haven't read every American journal on medicine and whatnot for prescriptions, but there are tons of different studies that they've done since they've started making these prescription medicines, and since people have been taking them, right? It's funny, more and more I think people are taking prescription medicines than ever before, and recently I think I read numbers where harder drugs like marijuana and cocaine and stuff like that were actually dropping at one point.
So who is selling these prescription drugs? Because I think the idea, or I think the impression that we get, it's generally like the healthcare industry, or it's the doctors, or on some level it's to our best interest that these things are being sold to us. But who do you think is actually selling prescription drugs to us?
Well, I think you have to go back one first and say, why are you even taking prescription drugs? I think most of the times people start taking these, painkillers because they need them. And I mean, sometimes you do need something to take that pain away, especially if you've been in a car accident, or you've gone through some sort of traumatic surgery or something like that. You need the doctors will typically give you something. So you did say doctors, and I do think the doctors do give them to you, right? I think initially they started off with the right intentions, trying to help you ease that pain as you're recovering, from whatever your symptoms were. As we've moved forward, I do believe, more and more, we were talking about late night commercials. Chris Rock had a wonderful skit years and years ago now, but he made point of it and made fun of it at the same time, but saying, the commercials went something like this: "Hey, are you sad? Are you happy?" And maybe you would relate and say, well, maybe I am sad, maybe I am happy. Or are you male or are you female? Say, well, I'm male, I'm happy. It's like, maybe this drug is for me, right? And they'd continue to try to find that one symptom that you could relate to and say, well, I need that pill, right?
That's like a sales technique, isn't it? Like where you get somebody to say yes a bunch of times, and then they're more likely to say yes when you go to close the sale.
Yeah, for sure. That's true.
But when I usually recognize it when people are doing that. So when they're looking for a yes at the very end, when they're trying to sell me the product and they hear a no, they taken aback. They don't know what just happened. And the thing is, I've recognized your sales technique. I know how that works.
Well, exactly, right? I mean, the doctors are trying to make money. They're salesmen as well. They're supposed to be there to help you. And I do believe there's a small percent of doctors out there that are really trying to take care of the general public. These doctors, I think, may have gone all overseas, unfortunately, and I guess fortunately, to help all the, Doctors Without Borders kind of thing. They're all helping people overseas, trying to get them better. But then that just leaves us doctors, and again, we're talking about North America ourselves here. But a lot of this in the industry here is really based on money.
Yes, definitely. And I think the interesting point that you made earlier was that some people kind of need the prescription drugs, whether it's because of pain or in some cases, there aren't many of them, but some people have like a serotonin deficiency, and that's kind of the pleasure chemical in your brain. So when you don't have enough of that, you are depressed. And so that would actually be a definition for clinical depression. But whereas most people will experience depression in their lifetime at some point or another, circumstantial depression, or maybe just like you experience lows and highs and you're really sensitive like I am. I experience like tremendous lows and tremendous highs. I do kind of find my point of stability. I've had to find that over the years if you want to kind of function as a part of society. But
oh, you're right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And I think I do want to come back to this money thing. Like somebody is obviously making money on these prescription drugs. I mean, the best kind of business is one where people pay you month after month after month to refill their supply. Really, telecom companies kind of work the same way. So, I mean, I'm not disparaging businesses that do that. I think it's actually a great business model when it works properly and you're offering value to your clients. But I feel like there's nothing more desirable for maybe doctors or maybe the healthcare industry or maybe the people who are selling these drugs to have people go on a subscription plan of some kind.
For sure, David, and even having the ethics behind what you're doing, right? So, I mean, if you look at doctors, they can be really compared to, the typical drug dealer. What's the real difference? They're both charging you money for a product. They're all being given this product or buying this product from a different supplier. One being the perhaps the drug lords in some of these South American countries, or maybe is for the doctors, they're being supplied this medicine from just the pharmaceutical companies themselves, and I put medicine when I said that in quotation again, right? Now a lot of times we did say the medicine is helpful, but again, with any sort of medicine, what happens are side effects. Yeah. So they put you on a second medication to deal with the side effects. And now that medication also may have a side effect. So they get you on a third medication to have, to help you with your symptoms. So
aren't they really just multiplying their income?
Well, they're multiplying their income. They're keeping you sick. And they are just, they're keeping you under their grip, realistically, right? So month after month, either your insurance company's paying this out, so these pharmaceutical companies are being paid by the insurance companies, but to keep you drugged up, in the big picture.
Yeah. And I think you're right when you say that there are good doctors in this world. We also have things like naturopaths that offer solutions that you may not be presented with at the doctor's office. I think emergency care is absolutely needed. To me, that part is not in question at all. But part of it is education. So how are doctors trained as they go through school? And I think it's become so procedurized to where, what do you prescribe this person if they come in with this particular illness? Antibiotics. They're trained to automatically think of the drug that's going to, quote unquote, solve the situation, when in reality, maybe it's just causing more side effects, more problems, more ancillary kind of things that are going to make that person maybe not worse, but we think of like antibiotics and the consequences of using them, they become less effective over time. So it seems like this whole, cookie cutter training that doctors go through isn't actually to our benefit.
No, you're 100% right, David. And even one of the things you just said, you take an antibiotic and it's supposed to help cure one symptom. But anything that you put into your body, once you take that, ingest it, and now that, let's say that antibiotic is supposed to help you with a lung infection, but your body, although may be healed from that lung infection, another part of your body doesn't want that pill inside of it, so will fight that that drug that you've ingested to fight that lung infection. And for example, like your liver, because it's got to detox your whole body, and your kidneys got to detox as well, right? So there are other parts of your bodies that can be hurt while you're trying to fix something else.
Yeah, and that's not great. And in addition to medical doctors, we also have to think of another category of doctors, which is psychiatrists. I believe fully in psychology, or counselors, or people who can provide you with tools to help you. I don't know that psychiatry is rooted, I respect the profession. I don't know if it's rooted in the same intentions. In other words, I think it's called their DMT-8. They look in the book, they find out or they kind of make an assessment of what the condition is, and then they prescribe a drug to that person, whether it's depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder or something like that. Sometimes it's absolutely justified and that person may not be able to function normally without the drug. But I think there's also this tendency or this proclivity to give away all of these drugs to people that are self-prescribed and may not necessarily need them. They're just maybe going through a difficult time, or they just they're convinced that there's something wrong with them, and that's their out, or that's their excuse.
Yeah, no, you're right, David. One of the things that you made me think about was when you said, they open up a book and they find that is what lawyers do too, right? I mean, they have
True.
all these cases that have been fought and won all over, let's say Canada or United States or anywhere else in the world, and they can always go back to that one case and say, this is how it's similar, so the outcome of that case could also be similar in our own case. So there's ways that they can go back and look at the same thing and look for patterns, right? And you're right, with psychiatrists, their goal is to help the person adjust, right? So if it means to have to give them drugs to be happier or get over something, perhaps a death or something, some sort of abuse, they'll give that drug to them to help maybe numb the pain or help them, feel happier when they're depressed, but overall, if you're not really, the big picture, if you're not really dealing with the death or not your own death, but the death or the abuse in your own ways, those drugs, all they really do is mask that over for a long period of time.
It masks the symptom and doesn't totally heal it.
That's right.
Right. Another thing that I find pretty fascinating, and I think it is related in a way, is this whole thing about prostate checks, which for men, right? So there are now studies showing that this is actually pretty controversial and may not work the way we think it does, because we say, oh, check now, prevent early, find out now whether or not you have prostate cancer. But we know that from birth we have cancer in our bodies, and prostate cancer is something that we always have, just in different levels, or so I've heard. And
you're not a doctor, are you, David?
No, I'm definitely not a doctor. But I think what studies are now showing is that this whole thing of checking for prostate cancer increases your chances of having prostate cancer, which is bizarre.
And I like that example because it makes me think when let's say you're feeling a little sick you're feeling a little sick, you go to work and you go in and you tell one person and you say, I'm kind of feeling a little feverish today, and then everybody eventually will say, oh man, you're feeling a little feverish today. Even if you don't even have a cold, you can tell somebody that, and the more people keep saying that to you, you'll start believing it, and eventually you'll actually start feeling feverish.
Yeah. I think there's sort of like a name or a term for this whole phenomenon where medical students will be reading about or learning about a particular sickness, and they themselves will begin to feel those symptoms.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, so I don't know, like that speaks to me to the power of the mind, because we can convince ourselves into believing a lot of different things, whether it's that we need drugs or we don't need drugs, or we've been treated unfairly, or we have a disadvantage to anybody else that's on planet Earth. So then we adopt this victim mentality. It's pretty amazing the ways in which we kind of use and abuse or even negate our own power.
You're 100% right again, David. I mean, you've made some really good points. One of the things that, when you're not using your own power, you're letting other people decide what you're gonna digest or ingest. So if we go back to the 30s and 40s, me and you weren't around, but our parents were around at that time, potentially, or at least grandparents were around. And the doctors then, I don't know if they were any different than the doctors they are now. Although the medicine is a lot different and the pharmaceuticals are much different, but this whole Canada and the United States were built partly on the misery of people taking pharmaceuticals, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Another really, I feel like an interconnected industry to this whole thing of pharmaceuticals is food, because people are saying, okay, well, you'd have to eat more food to get the equivalent of the nutrients you used to be able to get, and that might be because of the synthetic foods or the non-natural sources that we now derive some foods from. It could also just be the fact of our eating habits, where we go to fast food or we go a bag of chips, and as we know, there's so little nutritional value. I mean, I think that's not necessarily taught in school sometimes.
Well, I don't think chips made the food group, did it?
No, my dad used to joke the styrofoam food group.
It's true.
It's funny. Yeah, so you could have but the whole food group thing is another thing to, I guess we kind of went into that before, but it's another thing to kind of, that's funny to me because it was paid for by the Dairy Association. So you think they might have a vested interest in having dairy as a category, as an important part of your nutritional plan? I certainly do, but I'll leave that to your judgment. The thing about, the connection between food and pharmaceuticals is if you're not getting the nutrients you need, if you're not healthy, if you're just not getting enough vitamin D or the sun or whatever else, you can now quote unquote supplement. I think in general, vitamins and supplements are a good thing, but there's also not so good ones, which depends on the chemicals they're made out of, or if they're just really cheap vitamins, oftentimes they're made out of like oil, right?
Absolutely, David. And, it makes me think again of what we used to hear growing up, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. I think we all grew up kind of hearing that and hearing that vitamins C can be found in oranges at the highest concentration. Again, I think all those foods are paid for, and those industries are paying the doctors to say these things and paying the nutritionists to say these things, so we as a nation keep consuming them. But you made a good point. We're growing these apples or any sort of food. We're growing them, but we continually grow them in the same soil we've been growing them in for years. And,
right.
For most parts, I believe we've probably taken most of the nutritional value out of that soil. So the apple we used to eat 20 years ago is definitely not the same apple we eat today. So yeah, they need us to supplement with vitamins, that are, like you said, synthetically produced in labs,
right.
And in that lab, how do you know what you're really getting? Take a vitamin every day. Isn't that the same idea as taking a pharmaceutical every day? I know when I take a vitamin and then a couple days later, or not a couple days, a couple hours later, when I got to go to the bathroom and take a pee, it is bright yellow. Well, I've just peed out most of the vitamins I just ingested.
Yeah. You've actually brought another important point to the fore and made me think of another source that's interconnected with the health industry, which is media. What is the media saying about food? What is it saying about supplements? If you answered nothing, then you clearly aren't watching carefully enough, because probably as we described earlier, there's so many commercials where they talk about specific pharmaceutical drugs for specific conditions. But every day in the newspaper, people go, oh, but they found out like coffee's not healthy for you anymore. And next year it's like, oh, but they found out coffee is healthy for you now. And people just repeat things that they hear or see in the newspaper and think they're being smart, when in reality, we've been flip-flopping on these issues. If you pay careful attention to what's going on, we've been flip-flopping on these issues forever. And I don't think anybody is going to 100% ever agree on what's healthy and what's not healthy. And I would say just shut that out. Get rid of it. Stop listening to that crap, because it's utter nonsense.
I agree. I've heard the low-fat diet, the no-fat diet, the low-carb diet, the high-carb diet, all sorts of different diets, the protein, no protein. It comes down to what you feel is right for your body. Everybody's body type is different. There's different diets that include the blood type diet. There's the Atkins, and we can go on and on. All the different fads that have come. And again, these are all about making money in the big picture as well. Just like the pharmaceutical industry is all about making money and getting you hooked to believing something that it'll continually work for you, right? I'm sure I fell a victim to all that as well, right? Eat a high carb diet or high, who doesn't want a bowl of pasta every day?
High protein, high vegetables, whatever.
Yeah, and we've all fallen for that, but just finding that right diet for you works for you, right? So let's going kind of back into pharmaceuticals for a second. Have you what's your, experience with pharmaceuticals?
I've never been prescribed any drugs, nor have I ever taken any prescription drugs. I even had a period where I went through an anxiety disorder. It's still not like completely 100% healed. I don't know that it ever is, but it's like more than manageable to where I'm very high functioning, or you could say, I mean, I don't even like the term high functioning. I'm functioning. Thank you very much. There are different reasons why I might have anxiety, and that could also be rooted partly in the media, in the lives we live, in the way we perceive how others view us, and how what we think others' expectations are for us. And when you really examine that, you find out that people don't really have a lot of plans for you. You should probably make your own plans for life. But yeah, I haven't ever taken prescription drugs, but I have taken drugs, for example, for headaches, right? Ibuprofen, Advil, Tylenol, I've probably taken them all. Or whatever drugs that I got at the doctor's when I was still a kid in Japan, because that's usually where we would have had a flu or influenza or cold or whatever else that we might have been suffering with. So I do remember taking that kind of stuff. How about you?
David, as we grow up, we're subjected to, I think, drugs that we don't even realize we're taking.
True.
When you're getting your shots as a kid, and that's another big thing now.
I was just thinking that
right?
now.
So
yeah.
A lot of people say, should I give my little child a shot? Should I not give him anything? We don't know what's in it, and stuff like that. So there's a place for, these kind of pharmaceuticals. They did cure polio. So, you know what I mean? But in some instances, I believe I've heard even that's come back in certain places.
Right.
So it's not necessarily always going to be cured. It can be genetically mutated and come back as a different form. But going back to my personal experience, growing up as a kid, getting my shots in school, you were getting them in school. That's where the pharmaceutical companies were first getting to you, and then when you were sick, if you were sick as a kid, you're right, your mom would maybe go to the doctor, they'd get you some sort of antibiotic or a penicillin.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember or not, you said you haven't, but they used to give you this banana flavored syrup when you were a kid and when you were sick too, right? And you would take that, and that was that actually. Antibiotic. You remember, right?
Yeah.
So even though you think you haven't taken it, you've taken them, right? And growing up and going into high school and whatnot, you'd get a headache and your buddy had a bunch of Tylenols or ibuprofen. In this situation, I guess we can't use certain names potentially, but they'd have that ibuprofen, and you'd ask for one or two, and then one time I actually popped 23 just to see what happens. To be, and not that it was good, and I never recommend anybody do that.
Yeah.
But what happened to me was my liver hurt, and I don't know if anybody's felt their liver hurt. That it hurt, and I had to drink tons of water and
flush it out,
and I wasn't like going to the hospital or anything, but it was crazy. And then growing up and taking my vitamins, which really is an over-the-counter pharmaceutical. Manufactured, and taking those every day or at the time, and even through the network marketing business that we were in, vitamins were one of the things that they told us to buy because it provided a high business volume and a point volume towards your business. So even that to me is pushing. It's like a drug pusher, buy this because it gives you this, and now even where I am right now, about 2004, I was actually diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And at that point, it's something that you do need to get treated with drugs and pharmaceuticals, because there is no real, from what I've read, there's nothing known on why it causes it, and there's no known cure for it, but there are pills you can take.
Other than diet, I guess.
The biggest thing I found was absolutely diet and meditation and just really understanding what caused my stress. That was part of it, but being on that medication for, I think, almost 5 years, and then once I was on it, I realized, why am I on stuff like prednisone and Imuran? Those are the things that are keeping my symptoms at bay. How would I ever know if I'm actually cured until I stop taking it? So going to my doctor and saying, hey, I want to get off of this stuff. And even the doctor at the time was saying, well, we don't really want you to get off this stuff because we don't know if you'll have a relapse.
They always say that, yeah.
Right. And for me, I really wanted to know, was I cured? Was all the things I was doing outside of the medication really working? Once I got off that medication, here is an interesting thing the doctor told me, that I had enough medicine in me, or, and I'll put that in quotations, to last in my system for 9 months. So I had been taking the stuff for 5 years, and now there was my body had absorbed so much. I had 9 months worth of medicine in me. So even if I got off of it, I would still continually get the same effects of that medicine.
Does the body ever truly get rid of what goes into it?
That's a good question. I think you should answer that.
I'm not sure. I've talked to nutritionists that say, once they, once someone dies and they take them to the morgue or whatever, and they cut them open, they will see things like, undigested vitamins in their bodies and things like that. I don't know if that's 100% of the case all the time, but sometimes they do find that, and maybe even vitamins or drugs don't necessarily have the effects that the desired outcome that we are actually looking for from them. The other thing you mentioned about shots, I think that's a highly controversial subject, and definitely I did get shots growing up, and I remember that now. I was just recalling it as you were about to mention it. So that's kind of a fun thing. I generally don't agree with getting shots. I know people that get shots for, flu shots every single year, and some of them still get the flu, which tells me I first of all, I don't know about its effectiveness, but second of all, there's people that die from shots every year. I mean, people die from a lot of things, don't get me wrong. They die from asphyxiation, they die from car crashes, they die from a variety of different things. But, there's documented cases of people dying from getting these vaccines as well. So
well, and people are overdosing on pharmaceuticals all the time as well, right? Not just vaccines. The interesting thing about vaccines, like you were saying, is that although you get that flu shot, it doesn't necessarily mean you've got the shot for the right strain. The flu or the virus itself will mutate as well, right? Just like a cancer cell does.
Well, and what else is in there? Who are you trusting your body with? That's a huge question, I think, when it comes to vaccines.
Yeah, ultimately, I think you're trusting the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, and potentially the government that allows them, that gives them the money to maybe and funds them on finding the cure,
We kind of live in scary times, it's sort of like the beginning of the end, because pretty soon everybody's personal data will be in the cloud if it isn't already. And now we're going to have, chips implanted in our right hand and things like this. Like, yeah, we're kind of years away from this happening, but it's also something that's been predicted in various fictional works as well as the Bible. I can't tell you whether or not the Bible is fictional or nonfiction, but it's a book. It's out there. It's one of the highest selling books of all time, surprisingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're talking about, the chip in the finger or in the hand, is, I think it's called the mark of the beast.
Yes, it is in the Bible.
Yeah, and that, potentially we are on the way there. I think I did read an article one time that someone in Europe had actually gotten that after 9/11, I believe it was.
Yeah, something like that.
So, I mean, there are people out there who are moving the agenda forward, and, pharmaceutical is just, I think, part of that agenda, whatever that agenda may be.
Yeah, and that agenda seems to encompass the various industries we talked about. It's like healthcare, it's pharmaceuticals, it's media, and potentially even government or other people that are in power that, I don't want to make too many allusions to potentially the Illuminati or cults or a quote unquote higher power here on Earth, but we don't really know, do we? Because we don't look into these things on a daily basis. We don't think about them, and we don't, if we're getting shots, then probably we don't care. We just trust our healthcare providers to give us the service that we're trusting them to give, which I'm not convinced they are.
No, David, you made a great point. If I was about to give you a quote right now and I said this quote was by Plato, have you read all the works by Plato?
I have not.
No, but if I tell you the quotes by Plato, didn't I just lend credibility to myself?
You probably did.
Right? And you trust me, don't you?
Yeah.
So if I tell you that quote, you'll be like, you know what, that's a great quote by Plato. Just like if you trust your doctor because that doctor has your best intentions for you. Don't worry, take this medicine. I just got some in from the guy, my supplier, who brought it in because, he happened to been making his tours. But you take it because you're like, hey, the doctor gave it to me because your parents told you to trust the doctor.
Well, and who are the suppliers? Are they also in lab coats like doctors are? Are they in sterilized environments, or are they just dirty guys in a warehouse? You know what I mean? Like, forgive the term or the way I said it, but it could be just these guys, random guys, sweaty guys in a warehouse, packing it all in and shipping it all out, right?
Absolutely. And you know what's funny? You said media earlier, and just to the point you just made, with that, there are people that are even on places like Craigslist, potentially on there and just selling pharmaceuticals because it's easy to list what you're selling realistically anywhere. I can tweet it if I wanted to. I can put it on my Facebook, say, hey, does anybody have this medication? My leg hurts or whatever, right? And any excuse will do when you're looking for drugs, right? Just like any excuse will do for a crack addict or a heroin fiend or any sort of drug that you're addicted to.
Well, that's a whole conversation about endorsements as well. And I think it's one way to use your power is to endorse the right things. Well, I'll definitely have to get into that at some point. But you're absolutely right. You see celebrities on Twitter endorsing certain products and they get paid every time that happens. Do I look at that and go, they shouldn't do that? No, but I don't have any celebrities in my feed either.
That's a great point. And, it's all about mind control, in my opinion, right? With the celebrities, constantly telling you what to do, how to think, telling you about the stuff they're using. Myself, I enjoy rap music. I don't listen to it as much as I would love to or much as I used to. I like to stick to some of the older stuff versus some of the newer stuff because I'm not really into some of this drugs that some of these kids are doing these days. Molly, don't really care. Smoking lots and lots of weed, not really into that. Back in high school, everybody tried it. I still do every so often, not gonna lie to you. But it's not something I'm doing. But even with that said, with all the government control now on marijuana, how much of that is actually being changed? How many different things are they changing in the strain itself? Because nowadays there's probably hundreds of different strains I've never even heard of. How is that affecting you?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I don't think the government cares that much about legalizing or non-legalizing as long as people use "quote unquote" responsibly, whatever that means. Not smoking and driving, or not smoking and going to going for a walk or whatever the case might be. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that they would love to leave as a perpetual debate, going back and forth, because I don't know that they could care that much, because it could be a potential source of profit.
It is definitely a huge potential for profit. Some of the other non-pharmaceuticals that come to my mind are cigarettes.
Oh, yeah.
What about alcohol? It's probably the same companies who have a very similar vested interest in pharmaceuticals because, they keep you addicted, right? Just like a cigarette is an addiction. So you want to get off smoking. So now they have this thing called vaping. And now with vaping, there's so many different ways you can vape and different flavors.
Right.
I've had friends who vape and they're like, hey, give this a try. And I've tried it, seeing what it's all about. And I just can't understand it. It's like all I'm doing is breathing in flavored air. It maybe doesn't have as many toxins as a cigarette does, but it's just substituting one addiction for another addiction.
Well, I've secondhand vaped. Definitely never firsthand, and it is a pleasant smell, but that's all I need. I don't really need to breathe that in, I don't think.
No, and it's funny, you don't even know what kind of damage you're actually doing to yourself on a secondhand smoke.
No, it's
on
true.
A vape too.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, I'm not advocating secondhand smoking or secondhand vaping or secondhand, breathing in drugs or whatever the case might be. I don't think that's any better of an idea.
I think that's President Clinton. He smoked it, or no, it was Bush. I think one of the two that had never inhaled. I think it was Clinton, if I remember correctly.
One thing I wonder too. I mean, I think probably most things in moderation are okay. But, you see celebrities and such often smoking cigars, like celebratory occasions. Even somebody like Michael Jordan can be seen. He had a cigar room in his, $10 million home or whatever it was. I saw the video on YouTube. I don't know if it was YouTube. It was anyway, it was a high def video of Michael Jordan's home because he was selling it. Amazing home. But yeah, he had a cigar room.
And you make a good point. Even stuff people like Jay-Z, for example, you can see him smoking cigars in videos and whatnot too, right? It gives it that prestigious look and feel, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what pharmaceutical drugs kind of can do for you when you are on them. When you first start taking them, like I said earlier, I think you are taking them because you want to deal with some pain. But as soon as that pain actually starts numbing, and you can't even feel why you're taking the stuff anymore, you might feel some sort of pleasure. And now you want to continuously stay in that pleasure mode, right? Just like drugs do, just like cocaine does, just like marijuana does, just like smoking a cigar does, just like having a cigarette does, just like having a drink of alcohol does, right? These are all things that add dopamine to your brain and make you happier and feel so good about yourself. But as soon as that feeling goes down, what do you need more of?
More of the drugs.
More of your drugs. And so when you get more of your drugs, you take them and you start feeling good. And then when you run out of it, what do you get? More drugs from your doctor. You get the prescription filled.
You pay for it.
And you pay for it, right? So to me, it's just a way to keep you under control through all of these different ways to keep you addicted.
Totally agree. There are so many things that are controlling in this world. And I think we talked about many of them. If I can add a few, religion, school. Those are a couple that immediately come to mind. I think the very things that we think free us or should free us sometimes are actually keeping us under somebody else's thumb, of somebody else's idea of what values are, or somebody else's idea of what morals are. And I think that's kind of an unfortunate thing. But what I will say about drugs is, it's an option if you're not feeling well. It's not the only thing you can turn to. If you're not feeling well, though, it might be something to look into. Maybe you do have chemical imbalance or clinical depression, and you do need to augment your supply of serotonin. But in many cases, drugs are just one of many options you have to feel better. Whether it's exercise, diet, sleep, rest, adjusting your work schedule, taking time to enjoy life, slowing down, meditating. There's so many options, and you won't see results. If you start today, you're not going to see results tomorrow. But if you keep doing it over time, it's like the slight edge. You begin to see the results.
Absolutely, and one of the things that you made me think of was how many people have we lost to pharmaceutical abuse? Over the last couple of years, we've lost people like Michael Jackson. We've lost Prince. We've lost Whitney Houston. We've lost lots of different people, even like Amy Winehouse, to alcohol abuse
and
pharmaceuticals. They're actors, actresses, musicians, you name it, politicians. I'm sure there have been some in that. I think at one point the mayor of Toronto was on drugs, and same as I believe the mayor of Detroit at one point as well, and these guys are people we're entrusting to run our cities, and music-wise, and entertainment-wise, where these are the people we look up to, and then we find out the people we look up to are, dying from things that the doctors are giving them. Even Michael Jackson's doctor wrote a book on his experience with prescribing medicine and to Michael Jackson as well.
Right. I mean, the bottom line there is nobody's safe, right? Anybody could end up addicted to some kind of drug, maybe even sugar or alcohol. We all have various vices and addictions depending on who we are. And we have to recognize them for what they are. It can end up being a dependency. And when it becomes a dependency, then it's really hard to quit or wean yourself off of maybe something that's causing harm to yourself, to your body, to your relationships, and other aspects of your life. Any other thoughts, Maveen?
just kind of as we start wrapping up, David, one of the things I was thinking of, the reason I brought this to you was because I just actually watched a movie called Prescription Thugs by Chris Bell, and great movie. It kind of really gave an idea of the life of a wrestler and the life of a football player, and the things that they did to get drugs, because it was that high that they wanted to keep achieving, right? And they really made it sound very easy to continually get pharmaceuticals, from their doctors or get that prescription, right? You can tell your doctor literally anything. Oh, I feel depressed, and they'll give you something for it, right? They might run a couple of tests here and there, but it's not hard to lie in tests, as we know from school. You can get through anything, and if you really want that certain drug, you'll find a way to get it, right? So when I was watching that movie, it really opened my eyes up to certain things that I wasn't always thinking about or talking about, but I knew about.
Yeah. Even if it's just kind of on a subliminal level, you recognize kind of the things that are happening. I totally hear that, and it can apply to so many different areas of life. Well, so we're not healthcare professionals. We're not doctors. We don't have PhDs in medicine. I think some of the things we talked about are still important, but we would urge you to seek out professional help if you're suffering with some kind of condition, or if you just want to find out more about, what's good. What can I take? What should I not take? What should I avoid? Should I be on prescription medication anymore for my particular condition? Those are the kind of things that we would love for you to think about, but the decision is ultimately yours. This is how we're choosing to use our power. How will you use your power? We are using your power. Check us out online at usingyourpower.com.